We'll start now. This week we're going to talk about REST API. And anyone heard of that before? I mean, REST API is kind of a very common way of how do you share data online. And essentially say to access certain data, for example, I don't know, weather data or the latest stock market price, and you just need to connect to a certain URL online, and all the queries is putting inside the URL itself. Okay, and so we showed this diagram before, and to explain the difference between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. So for this module, we're going to using client-side rendering, in the sense the server, which is in the middle, does not send the HTML page back. So what they send back is the actual data. So for example, just the JSON object of a list of courses. And then that get created or turned into a HTML file in the front end with the Vue.js. And then, so on the server, which is actually happens inside express.js, where it generates this return, which is exactly the so-called the REST API. And so the REST API stands for Representational State Transfer, which does not make too much sense to me anyway. And then the API stands for Application Programming Interface. So API just basically means the interface that different programs can talk to each other, even when they're not written in the same language. So it's not just for server. So it happens in just general language programming, say Java, Python, etc. Okay, and the few advantages of using the REST API, so that which means it sends data, which is in JSON format, instead of sending the actual HTML page. On one sense, it will be faster because you are sending less data, and so you can imagine, say, if I sending a JSON object with 3 courses only, which is a 3-element JavaScript array, is much smaller a set of data sets. So sending back a page including everything, for example, the header and the footers, any other buttons, and then how these different 3 courses will be formatted, make it much faster. Okay, and also another useful thing is the same backend and can serve different clients or apps. So in the sense, because what you received is a generic data in JSON format, or could be even other format, and the front end can then decide what to do with it. In the sense, you could write, say, a Java code, which will receive the data from the same REST backend API, and then it can decide how to do with those data, for example, and display it on its own interface in a different way. Okay. Okay. So this is also something useful to know, maybe quite important. So this one is so-called stateless. Okay. Anyone knows what stateless here means? Okay, what it means is, so every time the server tries to handle a request, and it does not remember it at all. So it would not know if the same client has been sent the same request before, or it's a different client, or the same request has been requested before, etc. So it can't remember anything. It doesn't remember anything. So then, for example, there could be downside. For example, if you try to access sensitive information, then you have to make sure every time the user is logged in some way, because it can't remember if this is a user that has been logged in before, so you have to make sure some way. But also, there's also benefits, and for example, it makes it much easier to scale. Okay, so for example, And the scale, in a sense, if you have one server serving a website or an app, which becomes very popular, now there's 1 million people accessing it at the same time. And obviously, one server was not going to be enough for this. You need maybe 10, 20, or even 100 servers. And because it's stateless, and you can dynamically change how many servers are providing the service, so long as it's the same service. Because it doesn't have to remember if this user has been requested something before, or whether it's logged in or not. And because every time it just request, and all you need to do is provide some response regardless of previous status, so making it much easier to scale. So, and what you can do actually now is say lots of these apps, popular apps, their backend scales dynamically. Just because, for example, when there's more than say 10,000 people say requesting on a server, it automatically add a new one. And when it's less than say 5,000, automatically combine two servers, reduce the number. And okay, so and here are some examples of what this kind of REST API request would look like. So these are the things will be sent from your client side, front-end side, running the browser, to the REST API to try to get something or response. And so the first part would be you would have different type of methods. So you have to specify the type of request. So in the browser, you can only send GET request, but obviously there will be put, post, and other type of, say, delete as well. And then depends on the path, then you would have different response from the server. So we discussed this before, say in the last week and also in the lab exercise. So these different routes, which will have different passes, and then it will give you different responses. And for example, if you just do say the how do I say /message, and it might return all the messages, whereas you say message/ID, then it returns a specific message with that ID. And you can have many different type of queries. And similarly for the put and post and delete, you can have other different formats. So the things to remember is say that put is usually used to update. So something in your database, you want to update your password or you want to change the price of the course, is usually used put request. And the post is usually used to create something new. When you add something new, it's usually used post. That's the general convention. Okay, and really, say in most of the cases, everything you need to do with a backend database, you just need these four types of operations: create, read, update, and delete. Or sometimes you will see this in short, CRUD or CRUD. And yeah, so for this module, we're going to try to create these response from the server to these different type of requests using Express.js. And we already explained last week how to create a route. So essentially, this is just creating different routes, depends on the type and path, and then do something to the backend database. So for example, we have seen something like this before. You can set the path, say start with collections, and has collection name as a parameter for load, and the response will be to retrieve all the items from the collection. Okay. And so just be aware, the format of this is completely up to you. So whether you want to have something called the collections, or just collect, or just COLL, or has nothing at all. It's completely up to you. Okay, and also we mentioned this before, and so you have to write a Node.js file, which including all these routes, and the main file, starting file, is usually called server.js, sometimes called index.js, or some other names. Okay, and it should have these 6 parts, and so you have to do the require. So you need to require HTTP, require express, and other things. For example, we're going to need to use body parser today. And configuring settings, for example, set the port number for your server, it's going to be listened to, and connect to database. Okay, this is something we haven't covered yet, so we're going to do that a little bit later. And then define middleware. So we mentioned the middleware last week, and this week you can actually see some examples, what they are, and how to create them. And then next part will be define route. We already did that last week. We'll be able to define routes. But then today we're going to see more examples, define routes for, say, different, say, insert, delete, or query operations. And finally, start a server. That's probably the easiest part. So we're going to do the middleware first, and then we'll talk about the database. Okay, and middleware really are just functions. Functions with three parameters called the request object, which is REQ usually for short, and the response object, which is usually what's created inside the function or modified, and then the next function, which is called the next part in the process pipeline. So essentially, the name indicates middleware is something in the middle. So it will be something coming into it, it will do something, and then pass on to the next part. That's what and the next part will just to pass on to the next part of the processing. It's very rare for the middleware to end the response. So usually what happens is when the server receives a request, and it will do something, and these things can be done in the different stage or using different middlewares. Okay, maybe first middleware would do is just check and if the user is authenticated. So does it has the rights to access the database or what the user can access. And what it do, it will get the request object, which should have user information, and it will maybe, for example, in the response, it will set a flag to say whether the user have access or not. For example, if it can check the user is allowed to access, it will say set a flag in the response or some internal state in the code, and then pass on to the next function. So the next function might be actually just say pass the text string that get the parameters. And okay, so in a more abstract way, so in the middleware, you can exit any queue code, and you can make changes to the request and response object. For example, you might including certain things you want to send back to the user, and you will add that to the response. Okay, and then call the next one in the stack. Okay, so this is what a middleware would look like. And so these two are not part of middleware. It just says I'm going to using Express, and I create an instance and I'll call it app. Okay, so all we now are talking about middleware in the context of using Express, but the concept itself applied to many other libraries, not just Express. So that's that. So this you look like is very similar to the way we defined route previously. You say app.get, so that means I'm going to respond to any get request. So that's the path that you need to match, which is just slash, nothing else. And then you have a callback function. It has these three parameters. So request and basically all these will be provided by the Express or Node.js. So you will get the request object, which is the user sent, whereas the response object will be started with empty, because then you have to modify it to make something happen. And the next, all you need to do is just call this function, and then we'll call next middleware, or the route. And finally, you start the server by saying app listen with the port number. Okay, and then we're going to see some examples, and now we're going to add two middleware in a very simple Express application. And the first one is called myLogger. And all it does is log a message to the console, which is not particularly useful, but it just says to give you a concept or idea of how middleware works. And the other one is called request time. It will show the time of the request. Okay, and so this is the what we start with no middleware at all. So we have these two lines, which set up the express, and we have the first one. This is essentially defining a route, which says if the route is empty, which is just a slash line, what we do is we send back hello world. That's all. So we have done that already before. I'll quickly create this one. Let me see if I do a new folder. Okay, and then we create a new file. No, I'll put this. Okay, and you're gonna just do exactly the same thing here. Just to save time, so I just copy paste these. So this is probably the simplest possible Express app. So you, we'll see if it actually runs. Okay, so you probably know now to run this, you type node, let me first see, am I in the right place? No, not yet. Where did it go? Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna run this. Okay, what do you think? Is it gonna run or not? Okay, so my guess is probably not gonna run. Reason being not being any errors in the code, and partly because it requires Express library, which we did not install in this folder yet, so it might not run. And in some cases, if it's already installed globally, then it will say okay. Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't run. Maybe it is running. And so the best way to check is just go to your browser and type in localhost. Okay, so it is running. Okay, so we have the very simple server running now. So if I now go to localhost 3000, it returns hello world. Oh. Okay, I don't really want to mess up with this one, then I'll maybe use. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, now we're adding the first middleware. Essentially, it's a function with these three parameters: the request, resource, and next. And all it does is just it just do a console log, and not even anything particularly interesting. It just do this. Yeah. So the important thing for the middleware is always to call the next function at the end. So otherwise, it's just kind of hanging there. It not stop, but it's also not running anything else either. So you have to call next at the end. So we just add, let's just add this one to our code. So it will look like something like this. So this is how you define your middleware. And to use it, and you need to do this line. So app is expressed and say dot use my logger, which is this function here. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So then, whenever it try to pass any or respond to any request, and it will do this one first, because that's added before this router will be processed. So that means it always run. And if you add this one after this, and it will never be run, because when you do this, it will basically finish the request because it sent back a response already. So it's not processing the request anymore. So you will never get to do this part. Okay, now let's just add this to the code. So into this part. Oh. So I have to add everything before the current route. So I define the middleware, which is called by logger. All it does is to do a console log. And so this is something that you should see from here. It will be displayed on the server side because all this is running on the server. You will not see on the client side. And you need to use it by using this, apple.useIt, and the rest is the same. Okay, to make this work, so I have to first stop the current server and the rerun. Okay, and then if I go to and browser and type in this again, localhost 3000, and then nothing changes here. And if we how do you get develop? Okay, I don't know how to get develop tools in there, but and on this side you can see, okay, and this get run when you try to processing the request. And if I add this one, and after this, and then because this is added after this one, it will not be processed or used. So you can just try again. So stop, rerun, and if I refresh here, okay, so you can see when I refreshed it there, and there's no log to get displayed here. That's because this line now is moved after this, and this will be run first before this gets added to the processing kind of stack or the queue. And then so this part, the question is this asynchronous? And this part the answer is not, and it always do this by order, and this will only run after this is finished. But the part because it doesn't get run because this one it finished the entire response because it sent. Sorry. Here. Okay. So first you can't just do next like this, because then it will not understand what is next. And you have to add it here, but again, it still after this line basically enters the results. We can see what it looks like. We stop and rerun, and I have to refresh the page. So it still tries to run this. Okay, so it still runs it. Okay. Yep. But still, I mean, I think the order matters, so it's actually look like possible, but still the order matters. So that's the main point. So the orders they appear in the code will be the way, and order they get executed. Okay. And so then we have another one. This is second middleware. The name is just called request time. And then all it does is just to get the current time, which is done using data.now. So the data is the preview function, and the now which return the time. And you can set the request time to the values you get from here, so that all it does. And in this part, we add this after the log. And once you had the time, basically once you set the time here, and in this case, we can actually send the time back as part of the response message. So instead of just sending hello world back, we can send, okay, the time we just created in this, in the second middleware. So probably easiest just copy this part. What's this? Okay, and so here we add a second middleware for the request time. It gets the current time. So this time, yeah, it's set as the request time of the request object, but you could equally say, including that information, for example, make it part of the response object. That's also possible. Then when we send the response back, it would have that time information. And then we send this one back. Okay, so now if I go to my client side and just send the same request again, so I should, and first get a different message back with the time, but also on the console side, on the server side, the console should display logged. Oh. Oops. Did I miss anything? Send hello world. What? It seems not. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, so it looks like it was still running the old version of the server-side code. Anyway, so that's the time, which is a little bit weird, and every time now you refresh, you get slightly different time. Anyone knows why the time is represented this way? Yeah. I think this is the number of milliseconds from the first second of the year 1970. So basically, the first second of 1970 is like this zero when everything is zero. So every second after that was number added that. So this one is and completely not readable by human because you have no clue what that number represents. But the computer knows this is and to convert in the other way. There's particularly libraries or packages allows you to do that. Okay, so now let's cover the middleware. So you can use that to do something. We're going to see more examples later on. Now we're going to talk about connecting to the backend database. So this is where all three parts coming together, the client, the server, and the database. So we're going to using MongoDB as the backend. And so we're not going to cover how to use it because we already covered. And in the second year module, there's nothing really more you need to do on the MongoDB side than what you already know. Okay, but for some of you who did not, say do the second year here, or that's two options. You can either maybe even you did do the second year module, you might want to go back to the second year module lecture slides, have a quick look, or that's the textbook, and have a look over the chapter 5, and they will have the introduction. The first half is introduction of MongoDB, and then covers everything we need to do there as well. So that's the link there. Oh, by the way, has anyone looked at this book yet? Practical Node.js. Okay, so it's listed on the reading list, and it's a free book in the sense all the content are online in a GitHub repository. And so they had two versions. That's the first version, and that's the second version, which is what we are using. And each of these chapters is here. For example, for this one, we need chapter 5 of the book. And I'll go there, and this is chapter 15. Just go chapter 5, and you would have this file, MD, which is essentially Markdown, similar to what you do, say, in the edit the Wikipedia page, and you can see the entire book there. It talks about different things, etc. Okay, back to here. Oh, okay. So before we get on to the project dependencies, maybe just show you quickly what we already have on my computer. So obviously I already installed MongoDB on my computer. And so a bit different from second year, it's recommended you just install locally on your laptop rather than, say, using the portable version. And so if I open okay, anyone remembers how do you get into the command line client for MongoDB? Yes, you can use a graphical user interface. Yeah, you could. But they even use the portable one, you still have to use command line. Yeah, it's just like. Okay, and so the first thing you need to remember is if you use command line and client, and this is called Mongo, and then I think on Windows to start the server is using MongoD. Yeah, so that's the two things you need to do. In my case, the Mongo is already running, so I just need to start the client, which will see this. If you see something like this, that's also okay. That means it's running. Do you remember the command to show all the databases? So first you have to show the database, pick one, and then you show the collections, and you can query everything. Okay, so to show all the database is just, I think, show DBs, and then it lists everything, all the database you have, and you should have 3.1 by default. And this after school is what I created. And if you want to use that database, select that database, you say use. I wish this can have autocomplete. Okay, now it says switch to this database. And then you want to do show collections. How do you do that? Yeah, so I can see, okay, there's one collection which is called the lessons. And then how do you, say, display all the, how do I say, or JSON documents in the collection? To search the collection, how do you do that?
Find.
Yeah. But what find? Do you just say find?
db dot could it be db dot in this case after school dot find?
I think it's just lessons.
Sorry, lessons.
Yeah. Lessons find. Yeah. So this is a bit different. So you have to say db dot the collection name and then find, then we should just give you the things that's in there. Okay, so I think it's useful to go back to second year, either check the lecture from the second year or just look at a quick look at the book. So these are basically things you need. So I have something here which is exactly the same examples we had before, some classes, this and that. Okay. So now we will try to say talk to the database through the Express interface, the middleware. And okay, and so this is something to explain. And so even the book itself is quite recent. The book here, and the second edition actually is published only in 2018, which is the one we're using. But things already moved on. So in the book, they were using MongoDB driver for Node.js version 2 point something. Okay. Now the latest one will be version 3.3. Okay. So the important thing is when the first number changes, usually there are some breaking changes. So if it's to 3.3, 3.5, all the way to 3.100, usually there's no breaking changes. But when the first one, say from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, then some breaking changes. So as a result, the code examples in the book will not work anymore. You just need small changes. Whereas, say, in the code examples, in the lecture slides, it's using the latest version 3.3. Okay. Yeah, the lecture slides is not the same as the code in the book. Okay, so yeah, so if you want to use the book, you have to make sure you installed this version or any version 2 of the MongoDB Node.js driver. Okay, and that you can do using npm. You can say, okay, I want to install MongoDB, but I want this particular version. Otherwise, by default, install the latest version will be 3.3 or maybe even 3.4 by now. Okay, and if you want to use the examples in the lecture slides, then you just install the latest version, which should work. As far as I'm aware, it's not moving to version 4 yet, so it was working when I created them. Okay. And then this part only affects when you try to connect it to the database. So if you remember, you have to write a few lines of code usually to connect to the database. You tell where the IP address is, and if you have username, password, you have put in there, and what port number is. That's all you need. Only difference part. And once that's done, the later one, when you're creating the routes or the REST APIs using Express, that's all the same. There's no difference between these two different versions. Okay. Okay. And also, maybe it's useful to mention at this time, say, for the next coursework, in the module handbook, I mentioned you're going to need to use MongoDB and Mongoose to create the REST API backend. But now we decide not going to using Mongoose, so you only need to use Express. Yeah, I'm going to update the module handbook, and also in the lecture slides we don't use Mongoose at all, so only the native MongoDB driver plus the Express. Okay, so these are the things we need to run. We need Express, obviously, we're creating everything using, and we need this one. So this is the native MongoDB Node.js driver. And then we also need body parser, which is just to parse the URL or the request the user sent. So that's what we need. There's only 3 things we need for the example. And the way to do this is, we covered this before, is just to type npm install followed by these package names. So for example, if you want to install MongoDB, and you in your command line, you type in what is it? Let me see. Let me find the right directory. Okay, and the first thing I can do is I can do this line, and I can do npm list, which will list all the things you have installed so far. So there's a couple of different ways, and you can just type in npm list. Okay, maybe let me clear this first. So that list is everything which is installed so far. Okay, and as you can see in this directory, actually I don't have any other files except the this middleware.js. So all the other things are installed globally, so you can access everywhere. And if you do list, what is that? Okay, I typed in say depth 0, so that gives you the top level and package you have installed. So because what, for example, it showed here is say you install the MongoDB, but it requires JSON and require optional safe buffer, etc. And this one requires further other packages. So if you just do depth 0, then it will only show the top level ones. So these are the things. And if you don't have these, you need to install. You just type in npm install followed by the package name. For example, you want to install this, and it will automatically go online and download the files and install that. Okay. Okay, and now we can actually creating the REST API. And so obviously you need to use the express.js file. Oh, we're doing a little bit too slow. We have to speed up a bit. You need to say use the express package, and also use body parser as well. We're gonna need that a little bit later on. And you create an express instance. Okay, we have done all those already. And then you do this. Does this remind you of anything? Where did we see app.use before? Yeah. But in the examples you have so far, we used app.us already. Do you remember where we used that before? Today, in the examples?
For the middleman.
Yes, exactly. So this is the command to including a middleware. So basically, the body parser, this package, we're going to use it as a middleware, and we're going to use body parser.json. So basically, it's going to use and to parse ways in things in JSON format. But basically, that's someone wrote a middleware, and this is you include that in your code. Okay, and so this is the part you connected to MongoDB. So this is the part will be a little bit different compared to the books, because this is using the latest version 3 driver, and you have to do this, which is require the MongoDB package or library, and you say .mongo client. That part is a bit different. And then you say Mongo client, which is this Mongo client here. And you say connect. So this will be the URL of your MongoDB. So you have the protocol will be called MongoDB, and will be localhost, and that's the default port 27017. Okay. So if you just install it locally without setting any of these, then it should just work. But if you, for example, you change it to a specific IP address or different ports, then you have to change here. Okay. And then you say that will be the 2 parameters for the callback function. So this function is going to be run, as we understand before, when the database is connected successfully. Okay. And the important thing is this here. So the ER is the error object. That means if that's something wrong, you cannot connect. So that will have some information there. But the client is, if you connect successfully, it returns a Mongo client, which is what you're going to use later on to do everything to the database. Okay, and this part, it says, okay, I'm going to use the client, which is the Mongo client, which basically represents a connection to the MongoDB, and it selects a database from my MongoDB. So basically, I'm selecting after school database from my MongoDB. So if you remember previously here, and when we do show DBs, we have this after school database in my collection. So that's how you use it. So basically, this is the equivalent of use database and in the clients. Okay, and then this one now would refers to this database in your MongoDB. Yeah. And then later on, if you want to do any queries or insert record, you're basically doing on this DB. Yeah. Okay, and say, for example, if you want to have a connected to a remote database or you have some username password, you need to change this part to this one. So you still have the protocol still is MongoDB, and you start with username, comma, password at the URL endpoint. But for your work, mostly this will just work fine. Okay, so this one, which is a function that comes with express.js and is short for parameters, so that's just spells param. So it allows you to get the information about the database and its connections. So in these examples, we want to we want to get something called collection name from the request object. Oh, sorry, wrong way around. And so this is a parameter, and you want to get something called collection name, and then say, and give that the value to the request object. So this is what you do. So you say app.parameters. So you want a parameter which is called collection name. So that should be something in the request object. So it will automatically pass the request object and get the value for this property. And then say once you have that, you would say db.collection this collection name. So this collection name here will be replaced by the values in the request object. And do you still remember what did this line part do? We seen that in the last slides.
To get the
Yeah. So
that would be lessons.
Yeah. So basically, we did this one. Say .db after school, and what it does is say here, it will .db collection name. So what it does, it will change the database selection in the MongoDB. So that means say if the request including this parameter or property in there, then I'm gonna change the database collection based on whatever user tell me to do. So now my collection will change to whatever that name is. It will change from after school or to say users or something else. Yeah. But the way to get the values of that property from the request object is using this parameter and then followed by the property name. And then you can use it here. And here I call it a collection name, or you can call it something else. But that's the values you're going to get, and you can use it in some other way. Okay, so In this example, we're going to create a root pass, which is just send a message. And the reason does that is because, for example, the correct way to say retrieve all the messages from one collections is to type like this. So this one, it says /collections and then /messages, which will return all the messages in the current selection, whatever that is. But then what usually people would type in is just typing this in their browser, and nothing can happen. So they think it's not working. But this is working is only saying you're not typing the right path for your request. So you have something this, say if user typing the root path, we just send a message, say to select a collection, you have to use this. Okay, but at least user get a response. They know the server is running and knows what to do if we want to get messages. Okay, now we actually getting to the more interesting part. So we're going to create some routes in Express, which actually talk to the database and retrieve something or do other things. So the first we're going to start with get. So as we mentioned before, the get type of request is usually to retrieve data. So in here we say app.get. That means if you send a get type of request, and that's the path. So this part is the text string you have to use, and this part, because you see there's a column here, so you know that's a property, and you have to replace that with the actual collection name in your database. So okay, so once you get that, then you have this, which looks similar to a middleware, and what you do is say request dot collection. So that refers to the database. Dot find with some conditions, and then to array this. Yeah. So I'm going to try to explain all these. So first, the request dot collection is just refers to the collection in your MongoDB. So for example, if you've done this line here, and then you would have selected a collection from your database, which is stored in the request.collection object, a property. Okay, and then there's this dot find. Okay, this dot find is exactly the same as you would type in the command line. For example, here, when we try to again, okay, it doesn't understand. But if you remember here, so when you say query a collection in MongoDB, that's how you do. You say collection.find, so which is exactly the same as you do in the code in Node.js. Okay. Go back to the slides. You say that's your collection, and then it's dot find. Yeah, and you can add conditions. For example, you say location equal to Hendon and the topic equal to mass. These are the things you put in here. So currently there's no condition, that means retrieve everything. That's what this does. Yeah, and then again you need this part, which is a bit weird in the sense once you does here, it gives you a cursor or say a pointer to a list of records in the collection, not to the actual collection itself. Does that make sense? Or let's say this one actually returns a cursor, which is essentially just a pointer pointing to just the start, just before the first JSON object in the collection. That's all, but it does not include the actual JSON object array. That's why we need to do this to array to enforce it to retrieve the entire thing. The E stands for error, so again, and the results will be actually the array that you get by running that. And so that's why here say if E return next E. So that means if E is not empty, you return the next E, which is basically the first in the E object, which is whatever the error message is. And also because you have the return here, that will terminate the code. So basically the function will stop because it doesn't return. And so basically if E is empty, then this will not run. Then you will run this line, which is to the response, now send the results. The results is what you get from here, which is the array of the objects you retrieved from the database. Yes? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, you can put more conditions behind the find to define something else. So this will be the conditions you defined. But for example, you want to do other things. For example, you want to limit the number of records to 5, or maybe you want to sort the result by price. You put that in the second bracket afterwards. Okay, so the first one is used for essentially for filtering. The other one is for, say, you want to say sorting different ways or limit the number of records. Okay, we're not going to go into the details, but that is the example of what doing sorting and reduce the number of returns. Okay, so we can add this to our code, and then if you run it, and you should be able to see the results. Okay, I have to use a different example now. And just because of the time, I'm going to use a code I prepared instead of the writing everything from the beginning. The middle, okay, let me stop this one first. That's the old one. Okay. We're going to use this one instead. So this one is now called server.js. It's very similar to the one we seen before with a few things added now. So up to here, all same as before, except we now added body parser, which is another middleware we're going to use later. Here is you include the body parser by using app.use. Now, and this part is connect to the database. Again, we've seen the code in the slides. You require mongodb.mongo.client, and then so you now actually do the connection. So that's the URL, and it will return you a client object, and then you say client.db after school by selecting a database. Yeah, so we all seen this before. It's all fine. And this part is to get the collection name out of the request object, because if you now go back to see, because now we know what the path is look like, so it will be /collections followed by property called collection name. So we can here to get the collection name out of the request object using this, and then here it says request.collection equal to db. If you remember, the db was selected before, so it refers to after school in your MongoDB now. And the collection.collection name. So basically that will pointing to the collection name you request for in the database. Yeah, so this one is the root message. So if it is just slash, it just says this is the root path. It says you need to use this kind of path to get anything, otherwise you're not going to get anything. Okay, here we're going to create our first route. So the path will be collections.collection name, and what it do is go to the collection and do the find. In this case, we're going to still retrieve everything. We didn't say limits or sort, and the result will be to array and this. And this line sends the results back, and this one is just finally running the server. Get it? Okay, so we're going to run this now. Control, yeah. Okay, so this one should be fine. Okay, so now I run node server.js, which is this file. In this case, it has some warnings, but okay, so everything is warning is okay. It's just it still runs. It's not error. And is this big enough for you to see? Can you see it? Okay, yeah, okay. And you can see it says this line say express.js server running at localhost 3000. So that's what the message I typed in here. So that's basically what is running now. So now if I go to my client side and I type in localhost 3000 again, I should get a text message. It says, okay, if you want to do something, you have to add these to your path. Otherwise, you just get this. And if you remember, the collection we have in the MongoDB is called lessons. So basically, if you want to retrieve everything from the MongoDB from a collection, currently we can only do lessons, nothing else. So we have to provide the lessons in this one. So the path, okay, it's a bit small, and I don't know how to make that part bigger. But you have to add, say, /collection/lessons at the end of your request. So you just do collection, yeah, /lessons. Okay, yeah, it worked. Yay. So that's what happened. So that means everything is running properly. So the server received your request. It passed the path correctly, get the collection name out of from the request, go to the database, retrieve everything, and send it back. So that's what you get. Yes. Yeah. So basically, this is what you need to do for the coursework. You have to get all these different steps working so you can get data from the backend. Once you receive this from the on the client side, then you can use view template to display these properly. For example, you don't want to display ID or display other information in the way you want it. Okay. Okay, and so the next part is say when you're starting to create these different routes in Express, so you're actually going to have a lot of these, more than you expected. So, and if you want to retrieve everything from a collection, you need one route, which we already did. But for example, you want to retrieve classes by location, you need a different route. You need to get to the, say, and you might want to do something like say /collections, or say or even not collections, maybe say maybe /collections, and then collection name, and then say say topic, and and column topic. Does that make any sense? Okay. I'm gonna see more examples later on, but say let me find some place I can type. Yeah. Oh no. Okay. Didn't install anything. Okay, and just ignore the first part. So this will be what you this is, for example, the path for selecting everything from a collection. And if, for example, if you need to select everything and select everything in a collection with, say, location equal to Hendon, the path would be look like this, and then location, I don't know, location name or something, yeah. And you need a second, so you have to specify the collection first and the location, and then you can imagine that have a different one for topic, and then a different one for both the location and topic. So you can end up with lots of these different routes which do different type of queries. Okay, and then what you need to do is you would have to start into testing these. So basically, when you create a route, you want to test if it's working properly, right? And you can always do this as we do. For example, here you can go to a browser and actually literally type in this, right? And sometimes it actually is faster to use something called curl. So this is a command line tools. Essentially, it's like a command line browser. And if you just want to testing, you can just say curl localhost with the URL. So for example, I can do localhost 3000. Okay, and you can see it displays this message here, which is exactly the response that you would get from the server, right? And you can do, and if I say collections, lessons, and it actually would show you everything. And you can actually do, the other things we show here is using say a flag called -v, and this gives you a more detailed information. So it shows, say, most of these are the head section of the return the response, which you would not usually get, and you only get this one by default. So that gives you these information might be useful when you try to find if something not working. So that's the -v. Okay, and the other things, the other reason you need something like a curl to test your API is because in the browser, you can only send a get message or get type of, you can't send put, post, or other or delete type without actually writing code. So you can write JavaScript code, say that using fetch or using, say, XML HTTP request, then you can send different type of requests. But otherwise, you cannot do it easily without writing code. For example, and then use the tools like a curl, and you can do that. For example, you can say curl -X, then you can specify the type of request you want to send. It can be get as well, or post, or put, or delete. And then in this case, for example, you want to post something, you can use a D flag, which stands for I want to send some data, and this will be the actual data I want to send to my backend. And you send, that's the head part of your message. You say this is a JSON object. And finally, and that's your, that's the URL, or basically that's the path you want to send to the REST API. Okay, so that'll be one thing, one way to do. But obviously, as you can see, if it's fairly complex, these tests, you might have to do many times until you get, say, the post part work for your URL. So the other tool to do this is to using something called a Postman. Okay, so it's a tools which allows you to do different type of tests, And also you can save them, so you don't have to type them again and again. And you can even create something called the collections, which is a number of requests, and you can run all of them all together. Okay, so it runs on all operating systems, and you just have to go to the website, either type it or use the link in the lecture slides and download the app. And so once it's installed, and it looks something like this. So I'm gonna hit installed. Yeah, let's see if we can make it slightly bigger. Yeah, the text is. Okay, so this is the biggest. Okay, here I have a collection, and inside the collections I have these different things created. But for example, for demonstration purpose, I just create a new collection. I just say demo. Okay, and then you can start creating a new request. And for example, I just click new request, and I say this is for my get, and I'll put that in the demo collection. Okay, and then what you can do here is you can choose the type of the request on the drop-down list. In this case, we're going to do get, and type in your URL. This will be localhost 3000, and then that's all it is. I think, do you save or then on your demo collection here you had one which is called get, and this one, and all you need to do is just click send. Okay, and this is what happens. So whatever response you get is displayed here. Then for example, I can now create another one. Let's say request. This says get collection, and I choose, yeah, I save to demo. That's my second one, and this one time localhost / yeah. So now actually I'm using to retrieve one collections. If I click send, oh, okay, localhost, yeah, 3000. Okay, so you can see, you can request it back, and you can choose pretty, which is formatted. You can choose raw, visualize. Anyway, so basically you can see the response back. But also more importantly, because this is saved, then you don't have to type it again and again next time. And also you can choose, basically you choose different type of requests you want to send, and this thing, and you can have other things. For example, if you need to log in, or you want to customize your header or the body of the message, you can also do. But in many cases, just do this URL or this line will be enough. Yeah? Okay, so that's Postman. Okay, and now we try to create our second route. And this time we're going to use post, so we can add record to the database as well, so not just retrieving something. In terms of the path, we're still going to be using the same path, because when you add something into a JSON collection, you only just need the collection name. There's nothing else you need. But here we definitely need the actual things or the JSON object we want to insert into the database. So this is where the body of the request, so that should be in the body of the request. And you can this again using the body parser, using the body parser. If you remember middleware, we added a little bit early on to get the actual JSON object out of request.body. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So app, now this one is not get anymore, it's post, because we're using post request. And the pass is exactly the same as before, but the express will not get confused because previously that's get here and this is post. So the two will not get mixed up. And it's the same, you have these three parameters, and then what you need to do is request.collection.insert, and if you remember from the code, maybe here, the request.collection, which refers to the collections that user wanted to, which essentially will be matching or pointing to the collection name user typed in here in the path, and then you do insert. Okay, the insert will just be the same as you would do, say, find in the command line, and you just do insert here. Request.body, as we said, the request is this request object, and because we used body parser, and it will automatically return whatever is inside the body of the request message, and that's all. And then it will give you again the results object, but in this case it could just be a message saying, okay, insertion is successful, rather than say returned a list of arrays. Yeah, and that's the message there. Okay, and okay, and just because we're running, we've got about 5 minutes left, and this is another route. This time we want to retrieve an object with an ID. Okay, because we're retrieving objects, we're still using get, but this time we want to say not everything, but only the record or the object with a specific ID. So the path will be a bit different now. It says collection name and followed by ID. Okay, you can see we didn't say slash ID and slash column ID. That's completely okay. This in the same sense, you might not even need this part. You just say slash column name slash ID. That's also work. But then the people requesting have to understand this format. Otherwise, it would not get working. Okay, and so first we need to do this line, because we're gonna retrieve by object ID, which is a unique thing from the MongoDB. So you have to require MongoDB. Previously we said require MongoDB.client, which is the connection to the database. Now this gives you the actual object ID things you can use in the JSON object. And then here the definition will be the same. So now I'm gonna using the get type request. That's my pass. And we have one property, which is the ID. I'm gonna use that later on. Okay. And then here we've seen this many times. So that refers to the collection, which you're gonna using this collection name. And instead of using find, this example use find one. In the sense, it will only return one object, even there's multiple things match. But we know for object ID, for each ID only has one object anyway. But for example, if you return search by, say, topic, then you know you're going to have multiple, that will only return one. Okay, and this part is slightly confusing, but if you remember, it's the same in the find. So the first curly bracket after the find is the conditions you want to restrict the search for. So you can say location equal to Handon or topic equal to mass. It's the same here. It says I want the ID of the object equal to this, right? Now we're creating a new MongoDB object ID object. It's slightly confusing, but basically that's a special object ID used only by MongoDB. And its value would be my request. That's the parameters, which is something done by the Express, and then it's dot ID. Is this okay? So if you look at the code, we actually used this before, okay, to get other things. Now we just to get the ID. So if we look at the code, so for just this code here, we use this parameters to get the collection name. Okay, that's slightly different, but the general idea will be the same. So basically, the request parameters will give you all the parameters. In this case, that's the ID set in the message, and the rest will be the same. So if there's error, you return the error message. If it's okay, then you return the result, which is one of. Okay, we're running out of time, but you can do update an object and use the put method. And the only difference here will be, say, you use, say, app.put instead of, say, get. And the rest is the same. You can say update things by ID. So you update the object with a specific ID. And finally, you can do delete. So you can delete one object with specific ID. And the only difference here, again, is just using the delete in the route. Okay, that's all the code together. We didn't have time to go through this, but you can, essentially it just says connect to the database, setting up the middleware and a few routes, and then it's good to go. Okay, in terms of readings, so that will be the chapter 8 of this Node.js book, which talks about REST API. So if you go to chapter 8, and it's about the REST API, and probably, but this is probably even better. This should be the guide. So that's just basically the document from the Express Express library itself, and they give you some examples how to do different things. Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You see, for that coursework that we're doing now for the REST API stuff,
Yeah.
we have to restructure the user's login and log out so that we have to use the database instead of the local storage.
Yes. So for the next coursework, everything needs to be stored in the database instead of local storage.
Yeah,
Basically,
even
everything now.
usernames and stuff.
Yeah, everything now in the local storage has to go to the database.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.